start this for
I'm planning on it. It's 6 o'clock, I know. Where's everybody? Boy! Gases. I told people something.
I'm there 3:30 or 4 o'clock.
I don't know how you doing it. I feel bad. I feel so bad that I'm like, I can't get up early. I can't get up that early. I want to go. Is Donnie McClurkin tomorrow morning? Is he tomorrow morning?
Yeah, there's Holy Week.
Is Donnie McClurkin?
Yeah. They do it at 5 o'clock.
But you know Donnie McClurkin, you can have a big crowd for that.
I know.
Yeah, I've got to get some surgery.
I don't know if I can get up that early.
I guess it's not really.
No, it's Holy Week. Why do you usually get about 5:30, 6 o'clock? I probably could do it if I wanted to. I mean, when I go to the airport, I can. And Donnie McClurkin is a good.
So the 23rd.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll be out for a month. Yeah.
You're not getting up that early. Cindy, you get up that early?
Listen, I think I'll be there at 3:30.
You look You've heard him preach before, he's good.
Yeah, I heard him preach before. He's a better preacher than he's a singer, believe it or not. You think so? In my opinion. No, again?
He's going to Nina. He's going to be at Nina.
Jeremiah Wright's going to be at
I'm gonna have him come speak to the board. I'm trying to get Pastor Cherry to have him come to the board.
You got to go on YouTube and hear his
Obama won't let me go.
let me tell you why they hate Obama, y'all. I don't care what they say about it.
But you know he's still a sought after speaker. I mean, he's always at Howard.
Oh, yeah.
He's always at.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Yeah, but I knew him before. I knew him before. I saw him in
Okay.
when he was just.
He's amazing.
He was in that They got a real young guy that runs that.
Yeah, Moss. He was here last year.
Yeah, Moss. Yeah.
I didn't hear him. I hear him.
I like his singing too.
Yeah, I got his CD in the car. Who's the other person who I like? I can't think of.
Have you ever seen
I went to, that was my, the first time I went to New Orleans.
I saw him in Florida. He visited this church in Florida that my grandmother was.
Okay.
He's good. Oh, yeah. You know, my But you know, people don't realize that he's got a great academic mind. It was a shame that they separated.
They don't have to separate. They don't want to. I know exactly how I feel.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no.
It's not going to be defined by somebody else's standards.
Oh, yeah, he did. But he picked the wrong person because writing was good. You know what I like? I listen to a lot of the stuff Joel Osteen.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I love Joel Osteen. His stories and whatever.
But you listen, you like girl, she is dead.
I never heard that. But he refers to that all the time. You can tell yeah, I gotta look at that.
You talking about
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for taking time. Apologize for my late arrival and forever thinking I can get just a little bit more done in 15 minutes than I actually can. I got a call from Van. He has to be at the mayor's early childhood public hearing. And Melissa has 6 children, not my names. So the only person I haven't heard
Jose?
up, down, or sideways about is from Jose. So we'll just get started.
Yeah, I'll send him a text.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. So we are starting section 4 today, unless we have any alibi questions from sections 1 through 3. And I'll start out just by asking if the administration has anything that they want to call out or from since the last deliberation session, or any notable anything that we should be aware of before we start our questions. Okay. Since the last time I started at this end, and I'm at this end, I'm going this time, Mary, if you
I'm sorry,
would you like to say
Commissioner
something,
Power,
please?
yeah.
Very good.
I just, as you know, I don't know if you could hear me, right?
Yes,
That's great. So, as you know, we have been, I have promised this board that we need to get our finance under control. And that's something that you all deserve a lot of credit because, as I have said to you, we cannot begin a new program if we don't know how we're going to sustain it. In terms, and also to make sure that the long-term health of the district, financial health of the district is on tack, because the community cannot take beginning and ending new program like we've been in that trajectory. You know, we have, and Commissioner Power, I know, you know more than anybody else. We started, for example, a daycare in every school. And I totally understand it, but, you know, it lasted about 2 years after we did an incredible investment, right? Because we found through the budget process that we couldn't afford it. So I'm asking the board and the administration and this community that we need to be mindful that our priority had to be clear. We could fund our priority, but we had to make sure what are our priority, because if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. And what I will provide to you in the next discussion is the forecast for the next, until 2018, which is where I have said that we could bring the structural budget gap under control. My goal is to bring it to 0. It might sound impossible, but if the board worked with me, I believe that we can get there. So if our program fails, it's not because we didn't fund it. That's sort of like a type basic fundamental things. That if you don't have the finance, you can have the best idea, you could have the best skill, you could have all the intention, but if you don't have the resources to support your program in an ongoing basis, then starting a new program does more harm than good. And that has been proven in this district. I could give you, in the past 10 years, how many programs we have started and ended, and also how many people are moving around this district because of every year revolving door layoff. In other words, we let you go, we bring you back. We let you go, we bring you back, and we had to end that. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that our finances are stable and that we end, and I think each one of you will appreciate that, year to year when you will have hundreds of parents here saying, what happened to my music program or my art or my career and technical education or my sport program for kids. So I just wanted to let you know that that is coming to you very soon. I think we will have that ready by our next deliberation.
Any responses to the superintendent? Otherwise, we'll just go right into our questions.
The only thing I'll say, Mr. Superintendent, is I think that maybe when we talk about finances, we need to make sure that people understand the breakout of grant money. Not saying that because it's grant money we can't spend it effectively, but grant money, and also Commissioner Cruz is on his way. Grant money, but also the overall budget. See, because what happens though is that someone will look at the budget and they'll see something like the amount of money that we're spending for the Soups Academy, and I'm telling you that drives people crazy, because the state mandated that we spent it or whatever, but they see that dollar amount and they get nervous. So I think that we have to keep that premise that you have of spending money effectively in all areas, because I'll tell you, some people think that some of the things we spend money on are ridiculous.
And that is a good point, and that's an educational part. But and I think that is an excellent point, because you have what I call an earmark. Now in government, everybody knows where earmark is, right? So maybe we ought to say, here's the thing that have been earmarked, that we cannot spend it in something else, even though we might think if we had the flexibility, like for example the Super Academy, if I had the flexibility, I might spend it differently. But that money will not be available to us if we don't adhere to that requirement, which is mean you have to spend it on X. And Commissioner Evans, that's an excellent point, because I do think, and that's a challenge for the board and the administration, because we have to explain that, but how do you explain it to a parent who want 2 music teachers in their school, which makes sense to me? That you cannot put 2 music teachers, but they say to you, but why don't you take the money from the Super Academy and put that? And then it's a very challenging situation for all of us. Board member, the administration have to be very transparent with that, which I think is important, what you're saying to us. And maybe we can do a better job. Maybe Vern, Bill, and we can think about how we can look at that in the budget and say, we're spending this money this way because it's earmarked for that purpose.
I guess before I ask a question, I have a little bit of a response to, in that it would be very helpful if, as the board is articulating things that are priorities, that are clear priorities, and it doesn't mean that everything is a priority, but as we are expressing priorities, if we could get more responsiveness to adjusting or responding, answering the questions that reflect those priorities. So for example, there was somewhat of a little straw poll taken at our last deliberation regarding the early childhood director position, and I believe there was support for for keeping that position, and I had asked a specific request to see the staffing detail regarding the vision for the new pre-K through 3 reading initiative with the early childhood director program intact, and with an intact early childhood program. So I think it's fair enough to say that it's at least close to a board priority. And so if we could see responsiveness to the things that are clear priorities, reduction in suspensions and adequate student supports, I think is another board-wide priority. And it's very frustrating to have, non-response regarding those concerns and questions, and to not see that reflected in the budget. And with that, I'll move right into my question.
No, I had a
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's when you didn't know.
When I first got here, Mr. Superintendent, it was like people were just spending money like it was, made in the back room. And without a consciousness of scarce resources. And while I think that I have not sensed that in the last few years, I think it's important that the consciousness culture, financial culture of our district throughout the buildings and here at central office be heightened. Money is limited, and I think that employees are going to have to begin to think, well, what can I give back? I think unions are going to have to continue to look at what can we give back. That's why I was pretty adamant about us discussing renegotiating, for example, the RTA contract, and as subsequent contracts come up in the future, we're going to have to look at that. People are going to have to begin to look at how much more am I able to sacrifice, because it is scarce resources, and for the fact that people will come here to ask to try to save staff positions, or try to ask whatever the project they are advocating for, it is important that we recognize and that staff recognize that we have to be in this together, that it has to be a win-win. So if you got a principal who's making $200,000, that principal, for example, needs to be saying, well, how much can I give back 10% to the overall cause of us educating our kids? So I just wanted to have that on the record. Thank you.
Any other comments? No. Okay, Mary, you are ready. Go ahead.
Okay. So this,
You might have to really speak up though, because I
Okay.
can hear coming across, but I can't hear coming down the table.
in several of the questions that were asked in this round by myself and by other board members, I saw similar themes from other board members in the questions as I was reviewing them. There were questions asked about, many of them having to do with support, student support, social and emotional supports, behavioral supports, things that are aimed at alternatives to suspending lots of our children and having them lose instructional time. And there was also questions about expeditionary learning that started with round 1 and continued with round 2 questions. And the responses in many of these cases were to say that we're undergoing negotiations, or we're in communications, or we're looking at X, Y, and Z, non-specific answers. And my concern, and I'll give 4 specific areas, is that I know for a fact that in each of these areas, negotiations or discussions or communications or considerations have been going on for at least 4 months in many cases, or around the year in the case of alternatives to suspension, because we've already seen the impact and the loss of alternative to suspension rooms in many of our classrooms. So that's got to be on people's radar. I mean, it absolutely has to be noted and noticed, the difference without having alternative to suspensions in many of our schools. So, when we get an answer that there's communications with Center for Youth that are happening, we need more specifics. We need to know what are the potential funding sources, what leverage, what can be leveraged, what grant sources might be available, what grant sources could we go after, what kind of, potential partners do we have in the community that could help, and how much can we afford given the priority and the critical nature of keeping our students in classes and not losing instructional time and not causing major disruptions in the classrooms where instruction is happening. So we need specificity on that. Same thing with gang and youth interventionists. I know in the fall, I believe it was in October or November, we recognized the need to patch up, shore up what was lacking in our secondary schools with gang interventionists. There wasn't any specific discussion. I mean, we know that we have Pathways to Peace, we have Youth for Change, those kinds of resources in the community. And to say that we're looking at it or negotiations are happening when this has been going on for months, long before Christmas. It's not acceptable at this stage in the budget to give that kind of vague answer and not give us a realistic picture of what we can afford, from your opinion, and what exactly the state of those negotiations or communications or considerations are. Same thing for Partners in Restorative Initiatives, specifically at the Douglas campus. That was supposed to be one of the major interventions to address the problems on that campus. To say that we're considering having an MOU next year, that's not specific enough. We need dollars, what we can afford, what we can't afford, what we intend to do in this budget. And then finally, the same thing for expeditionary learning. I mean, the parents from School 58 have been reaching out, they've been communicating. There's this number, $70,000 being thrown around, but exactly how much at each school is going to be spent. This, many months of negotiations. We need answers on these things so that we can move on and consider other important priorities and have clarity about where we're at. So I would just ask for clarity on, please don't tell us negotiations, communications. Tell us your best guess at the moment in things that have been ongoing.
Just one procedural point that I didn't know until I got up here was that for response for questions number 74 through 87, we have literally all but 2 of them done. We held back giving them all to you until we got those 2 answered because there was a concern about a confusion of having the other ones come later, but maybe that wasn't the best approach, and we'll get you these tomorrow for those particular ones, 74 through 87.
Okay, I'm referencing questions that had answers that were non-specific and frankly not helpful. So that's, but maybe there's follow-up or other answers in those, so thank you.
On the particular point of alternatives to suspension, Bill, could you talk to the board about what we talked about this morning or this afternoon about the difference between the teacher's assistants and the paraprofessionals, how that might be deployed in the area of alternative to suspension? Or am I misunderstanding the connection?
Yeah, no, there are two separate issues in this budget. The in-school suspensions, right, are removed from the elementary for those schools that have an enrollment of under 700, right? And in the one of the questions that the board asked was, how are you going to fund those 2 schools who are above 700? And the response that we put in writing to the board is that there's a vacant director of science position that we plan on redirecting those resources to fund those 2 teaching assistant positions that are required at those 2 schools that are over 700, School 12 and School 33. So that was that piece. The other piece that we spoke about that I'm not sure if you're referring to or not, but as we work through our special ed staffing situation, we have come across a situation where the director of special ed, his preference was to use the teaching assistant as the first supplemental support, and in some cases that was not reflected in the draft budget. So we would be looking to make an adjustment there.
And the impact of that was not an FTE impact, but it is going to add a cost to the overall budget.
Right,
Just
that
going from
377,000.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I thought we were talking about one issue, not a combination of issues. Okay.
Do you want me to clarify what, I mean, my question was all about
Yeah,
the
if you
alternative to suspension.
Yeah, if you
Not
could- if you
anything
could-
to do with in-school suspension.
Okay.
What you're describing is a shift from in-school suspension. Last year it was certified teachers, and this year it's teaching assistants, and next year it's not existing except for schools greater than 700, not in the smaller elementary schools. I'm talking about the alternative to suspension program,
Yeah.
which
So
keeps students in school, and it's different from the in-school suspension room.
Right, can you restate that part of your comment question so that we can try to get a clear answer?
My question was regarding alternative to suspension and some other areas that I noted, the lack of specific response to questions about what the intention is, because we do have some existing alternative to suspension rooms, a few that were paid for from outside sources this year. And I think it's evident that there are some of our schools that are really in trouble that need alternative to suspension. I would argue that. So is there funding for that? Can we find funding for that as a priority? And so the answer was we're in communications with Center for Youth, but it's non-specific. It's not talking about scale. It's not talking about criteria by which that decision would be made, whether there is a possibility of prioritizing a few schools, those kinds of meaningful, substantive answers.
So if I could ask the administration to outline their assumptions as to,
Yeah.
so that we get a better sense, and what the dollar consequence of those assumptions. In other words, if we believe that Center for Youth Services is potentially the answer, we'd like to know, okay, what would that cost? On the other hand, if restoring in-school suspension is the answer, remains an option, how much will that cost? How many additional FTEs would that add back to the budget? Would that be helpful, Mary?
Yes, in terms of the alternative to suspension in particular.
Just, in other words, every assumption in this book has some set of courses of action that are under consideration. And each one of those courses of action must have some cost related to it, and we'd like to know. Even if you don't know what the answer is, what our options are developing to be.
And making it simple, if your intention is to not do this, then tell us that, so that those of us who want to make a case for that as a priority and propose understanding that there are trade-offs, know that that's where we stand. So instead of saying we're under discussion, we're under, I feel strung along, to be quite honest, with some of these answers. If you're not funding it, tell us you're not funding it and we can't afford it.
We can provide you the cost for school per unit. But let me remind you that I said we were going to have social worker per school. And I believe actually that you even need more social emotional support like art, music, sport, and extracurricular activity. We are navigating a trade-off in here. And this is what I warned the board. We could afford in-school suspension for every school, but you can't have what you have at 23 today, or what you have at 46, or what you have. And what I'm saying clearly, Chairman Power is here, that I have been very clear that if it, and I do know district in this country, for example, they don't suspend a kid that is a pre-K through third grade, but they send it to a nice social worker where they can find therapy. Now, I could tell you I have a little background in mental health, that a kid that is very cranky because something is going on in their life, and you send it to in-school suspension, they're not going to there to do, to do math, because emotional. And if you do it, you send them back into the in-school suspension. So this is an area that I want to have a discussion with the community. I also want the community values in terms of, and the district, in terms, should we suspend the first grade? And is it better for us, whatever method, to give that kid maybe some therapy temporarily, rather than saying, here's how you're going to use it? So we will provide you that information, but I thought I was clear, and I will continue to be clear that on this board, and this is the competing priority, right, or conflicting interest and priority here, that you want to provide social worker just like in the suburban school. That's what happened. The kid doesn't get suspended there. They go into a nice counseling or group session, and they get that service. But you can't have that kind of service and then tap another service, another service. You could, but please understand that there's a trade-off cost in here. And we will provide you that information, but I thought that we were clear.
So if that's your vision, are you willing to outright ban out-of-school suspensions for all elementary school students?
Ultimately, I have communicated to the board, the 5 plan, that, and actually today I had a meeting, that we need to have a conversation internally with teacher, parents, family, community, internally and externally. And I do think that there's a case to be made. How do we serve those kids at a very early grade in a small school of 300 kids, which you have vice principal and you have all the support? How do we meet their needs? It was not long ago that people say we got to put a vice principal in every school. It was within my tenure here. We went and looked for money and put it in there. And what I'm trying to say is that, recommending to the board, is that we have to be very careful as we move forward with this budget, because you will find yourself, I can guarantee you, 2 or 3 years from now, going back to say, what else do I take away now so that I can meet my structural budget deficit or the demand? And mind you, that 3 years from now, I would say probably 5 years from now, potentially every dollar that this district get, an additional dollar from the state of New York, which is our major sources of revenue, could be just a transfer, because it will go into the charter school. So I have been very, 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 very clear that that's what is in the horizon, and that we need to manage that reality, and that we need to be very careful as we move forward.
Okay, but it does sound like the communication specifically in the form of answering board questions could be more precise. If in fact as I heard you say it, if the answer for elementary schools to alternatives to suspension is putting a social worker in each elementary school, or making sure each elementary school has at least one social worker, that is a specific and precise answer that pertains to the question asked. And if that didn't come through, at least so far as to say, the assumption is we're going to have more social workers. The assumption is that we won't have to have out-of-school suspensions. That might go farther than the answers we did get, right?
Now, wait a minute.
Okay.
Well,
Ready to move on?
I would just say that if we as a board are going to accept social workers as the answer to social and emotional supports to maximize instructional time in elementary schools, that we as I don't know, people use phrases like, trust and verify or whatever. What I would say is that we should make a directive that says there will be no out-of-school suspensions in elementary school, so that we can help support that notion that we are going to work internally, we are going to work with teachers and families and parents and the board to ensure that our schools, our elementary schools, are nurturing places where students who are being disruptive in class are not sent home ever and are, maximizing their instruction. And if we can't do that, if we can't put an absolute ban on out-of-school suspensions for elementary school, then we have to have alternative support so that we can believe that we realistically, we're moving toward less suspensions, less disruptive environments. Because realistically, having just a social worker as the answer it's not realistic. So if that's this district's answer, then to back that up, I would argue for a ban on out-of-school suspensions.
And what I suggest quickly is that for this board, when you construct a policy, because that's a discussion that this board had told me that you want policy that we implemented, but the best policy I constructed when they come from the ground up, and you get the community to buy in, the teacher, the students, the families. And when you engage the community, which I believe is a value, that I'm recommending different trajectory in the formation of this policy because it requires such a shift in caring and responding to the needs of the kid rather than a very mechanical thing. Suspension is an interesting phenomenon, right? You fill out a form and you send it. We are talking about, for example, I heard people mention that you want a more caring environment, a better climate, you want restorative justice. Is the community really in support of that? Are our teachers and principal and administrator and central office willing or ready to execute? Do they have the skill set to determine, and that a kid should be being placed into a counseling group, person in school suspension? And what I would submit to you is that when the policy was constructed here, that basically for one time that we said we were not going to have suspension, we know what happened. And the lesson that we had to learn from that is that we can't repeat it again, where we just come up and come with a policy or a directive from the superintendent or the board. We are engaging the community to deal with a very, very, very challenging issue.
Which is why we have to put our money where our mouth is in terms of adequate supports to get from here to there. And it's not just in-school suspension, and it's not just social workers. It's more, and it's expensive.
Okay. Jose, question, section 4. Malik.
Yeah, just, can you explain to me, what I always get concerned about, now, we're cutting central office this budget cycle. And even though we're cutting central office, which I think is a good thing, right?
Malik, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
We're cutting central office this budget cycle, correct? We're cutting central office this budget cycle, correct? But it's like a domino effect because whatever we do at central office has an effect on the school. So can you explain the process for me when we cut central office and if a person was an administrator, do they have the rights to go back to an administrative position? And if they do, what effect does that have on a school? Like, how is that whole process determined? Take me through the mechanics of that.
No, that's a great question. It's determined by contractual agreement. So in the contract, basically, it's called the bumping phenomenon.
Right.
So you have a person in central office who is an ex-job. That person get caught because of a budget issue. He or she could bump another person with less seniority who is placed in a building level in similar bracket, if you will. Actually, Bethany could speak to that with more clarity if that is not clear enough.
Yeah, if she can, because what I worry about is too often what we see happening in schools is you have someone that's effective at the school that they're at, and then they get bumped by somebody who doesn't know who's not a good fit for that building. And then they end up keeping the seat warm. And that creates a problem for the school culture and for the school, particularly if this person is able to handle that. And is there provision for a workaround on that?
So by law, we have to reduce by least seniority within tenure area when reductions are made. Under our current tenure structure for administrative positions, our bracket 3 positions and our bracket 4 positions, any positions in those brackets are in the same tenure areas. And those would include, bracket 3 positions would include assistant principals. So it is possible that someone who was an associate director at central office, if that position was cut and they had more seniority than an assistant principal in the building, that they could go back into a building. Or an assistant director that was a bracket 4, although there really aren't any bracket 4 positions in buildings anymore. But I don't think, I'll double check my notes, but I don't think in this budget cycle that would happen.
You sure about that?
So there aren't any central office positions being cut that would cause a central office position to bump back into a building, I don't believe.
Well, you may want to clarify that because you heard some, I'm asking this question because you heard some, I'm asking this as a result of the last budget hearing that we had. There was there was talk at school, was it 10 or 58?
Yeah,
10?
One of the,
Yeah, school 10, there was talk, if you remember those kids that came up and spoke and they said.
Right. So there are anticipated cuts in assistant principal positions, so bracket 3 positions, but it's not the result, it's because of the cuts in actual assistant principal positions.
So we are cutting, so that's not a cut at, so we're cutting assistant principal positions.
Right, there's a reduction of
How many-
seven assistant principal positions from the budget for next year, I believe.
Yeah, and
Anticipate.
can you talk about the surplus or administrator that we have here as a result of phase in, phase out, and everything that we have?
Sure, I mean, our administrator to student ratio is
Oh, I know
higher,
that.
yeah,
I mean, you have to
is
have
higher
that. Oh, I know that.
than our sister districts.
And I'd like to add to that, that we've been very measured, taking into consideration what you're saying, but eventually somewhere to a certain point that you can carry a surplus or administrator.
Right.
And we have been, and we will continue to be very measured precisely for the point that you make.
Well, yeah, and my issue isn't so much about the number of administrators. My issue is about, and this is maybe a conversation that we have to have outside of the budget conversation, about the destabilizing effect that it has on a building. It makes no, I couldn't imagine if I had to run a unit and all of a sudden I knew that every year the person that was doing a great job running the unit was going to be pulled out and somebody was going to be coming in who, it's like a crapshoot. You don't even know if they're going to be effective or if they're even going to be able to fit with the culture of that school. You know, that's a challenge. I don't know if you can address that through budget, but it sounds like it's more of a contractual thing. And I don't even know how you would get around that from a contractual perspective. I know the superintendent does have the power to remove a principal for up to a year if they weren't performing or if you want to do something different. But it seems like the board or the superintendent have absolutely zero control over putting just deciding who you want to go into, or the principal. I mean, maybe it shouldn't even be the board and the superintendent. It should be that leader of that building should be able to say, I want this person to be my assistant because they have these qualities. The PTA wants this person. But it seems like we have no control there. And it seems like, is it more state or is it more district?
Well, we have control over assigning the administrators, building administrators that we're allowed to keep by law. But the law does tie our hands with regards to reduction. When there are reductions in a tenure area, we have to go with the least senior person in that tenure area. So that is, that's strict by law. We can't get around that. So in the case of the students that came and spoke at the last budget hearing, that individual is one of the least senior in the tenure area. So we are required to cut in that order, not by merit or by other decision making. It's just seniority.
Yeah, I just think we need to do a whole education piece for the community around this, around this issue, because, I mean, it's, and rightfully so, if it's hard for board members to get their heads around this issue, you can only imagine a kid that's, 11 years old or a parent.
And I would say that, it's likely that that process has a lot to do with why we might have more administrators or more staff than we are overstaffed in areas, because we see that the people that are really good are the least senior in a budget cycle, and so to try to avoid losing them, we maintain positions that we wouldn't normally maintain because we don't want to lose good people. But that increases our staffing numbers in the long run.
I do want to underscore what Bethany said about, when you're in an environment where you can pull someone up from a house administrator up to an AP position or so, or what have you, we do have an extensive process that includes inviting the PTA and the school-based planning team to weigh in, and the superintendent, the principal of the school has a lot to say about who they have for an AP, but that's because you're essentially posting from within and looking at potentially raising someone up from a lower tier, level up a tier. When you're in a downsizing mode, we have way less flexibility.
Yeah, but it's really not good for us as a district, because one person, it's like being on a board or anywhere else. One person can change the dynamic of a building. I mean, if you get a loser somewhere, and I'm not saying anybody is, but you get a loser somewhere or someone who's not up to the task, they could alter the dynamic of a building in a week. So that's just a concern for me, because we're dealing with some of the most vulnerable students, and to have that that round robin stuff, I mean, is extremely difficult to deal with, and I guess it's something that we can explore at the state level and elsewhere, but it just seems that you have to find a way to. And I've seen this year after year at so many schools. They change, and it's like, what happened to this building? You go in 2014, and you go visit in 2015. They say, oh, the leadership changed. So we got to somehow get our handle on that. And then if someone is getting into a position and they don't have the qualifications to lead a building or be a part of a building, you got to find a way to get them to do something else, because it's just not fair to our kids.
Well, on the same topic?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I really do criticize the board, because I don't think that the board really has taken a look at these kinds of issues like we should, and to be able to, if we need to go on the state level, to be able to argue on the state level why we need to have good people in place regardless of seniority. I don't think we've done a good job of that. Now, if that's what we're talking about now, then perhaps as a board, we need to get together and have these kinds of conversations. I remind you again, when we had an opportunity to look at the RTA contract in a real holistic way, we did not take the opportunity to do that. And so it really is incumbent upon us, if this is the way we want to go, and I think it's the right way to go, then as a board, we've got to do something. We can't sort of just say, that this is not, it's not happening, we can, feeling out of control. We really have to take some actions. And so if the Center for Intergovernmental Relations, Community and Intergovernmental Relations need to take on some of this task, then I think that we need to look at it. But we really do have to look at, as a board, what it is that we can do in order to change. And I just don't think that the board has done its due diligence, in my opinion, and exercises its authority to really address these kinds of issues. I think we've allowed central office to do it, the superintendent's staff, but when do we begin to take on this role? And I think that we have to do that. In my mind, that's where, retreat comes in, where we really have to argue these issues, because we can do it, but for whatever reason, we're choosing not to do it. And so it really is on us. It really boils down to what are we going to do as this board in order to make these kinds of changes.
GC, it's your turn.
Thank you.
Since the first budget deliberation had a chance to get into the budget a little bit deeper, and on behalf of the parents within the district, a lot of the areas that we were looking for enhancements over the past couple of years, specifically in the areas of arts, music, extracurricular activities, athletics, AP classes. Very happy to see that those things have grown both from 2012-13 to this year to the upcoming budget year. So thank you for listening to the concerns of the parents of the board and of the children in the district to put those things in so that they've got those extracurricular things that we know are going to help them as they go forward. With that, and it looks like we're going to be stable, if not growing in those areas, there are a couple concerns from the parent perspective that have been a common theme over the past couple weeks, and I wanted to put those on the table. The first one refers a bit to what Commissioner Adams brought up earlier around some of the programs and specific methodologies that we've got within the district. There are a number of schools in this district that are gems that parents and children really appreciate and really want to see sustained. And some of those are more than non-traditional methods. The expeditionary learning, the IB program at Wilson, the Montessori program, School of the Arts, and some of the other elementary schools. And there have been just difficulties and challenges over the past couple of years in terms of trying to align some of those specific methodologies with the Common Core curriculum to make sure that we're giving our children the experience of these alternate methodologies, yet still meet the New York State standards. And what I'd like to request on behalf of the parents and the children is that the district looks for those ways to try to meld those two almost. I don't think they're quite in conflict, but there are conflicts within them. Try to meld those conflicting poles together so that we can have those schools within the district that have some of these alternative methods that are a big draw and in terms of the parents and children's minds, a very successful school approach that does allow them to learn and progress and grow. That's something that's been very important. And within those schools, or all the schools that deserve it, that flexibility in terms of some of the master scheduling, the staffing. We just went through a discussion here around the bump process and the negative effects that has, and the things that contractually there's not a lot of leeway in. But the things that we can control to try to keep those processes in place, ensure that the staffing is available and the positions are set in that June timeframe so that students and parents aren't coming back in September and trying to figure out who teachers are, and you have that unsettled approach to things. But really it's around try to ensure that these alternate methods can somehow be incorporated within the district, so we've got those schools that really do pull in folks, keep folks here in the district, and really allow our kids to progress and do well. So that was one of the parent concerns around that whole area. I believe that going forward, the various parent groups are trying to request meetings with people, Dr. Vargas, within your staff and potentially yourself to try to work through some of these. So I'd like to encourage as much two-way communication with those groups as possible. The other area is around, again, something we spoke of before, and it's around some of the disruptive behaviors and the social and emotional issues that some of our students have, and the various ways that we're going to try to address that going forward. There are a lot of kids that want to be in school, that are in school trying to learn, and there are multiple instances that we've heard over the years of one disruptive student or a couple disruptive students that just make the classroom almost a mess and very difficult to learn in. Those are really the things that from a parent perspective we'd like to see within this budget addressed, and the progress that I've seen with respect to the social workers and that approach is a great step. There's probably more that needs to be done, but that is another big concern of parents, and ensuring that when our kids are in school that they're able to get the education that they need in a manner that's as emotionally fulfilling and without disruption as possible. So again, thank you for the things that have been done and have been put in, and those are a couple areas that have been concerns and a common theme over the past couple weeks that I wanted to put on the table.
Thank you.
Can I also just piggyback to GC? All of those things are great, social emotional programs and what have you. Also, what I would like to be considered is teacher expectation. Because when teachers are not valuing our children, they can feel that. And let me just point out there from the East High School hearing the other night, when you have a teacher who is boldly stating that East High School rates are above the average of the city school district, he doesn't need to be in the school system. Because when he talks about 53% or whatever the number is that East High School has, that says to me his expectation for our students is low. Perhaps that could be why there are those issues that are going on over at East High School. Because perhaps you have some students that really want to perform, but you have teachers who don't believe in our students' ability. So when you have a teacher who get on a microphone that brags about the fact that East High School has a greater test score rate, 60% or 50-something percent, that says to me that teacher doesn't need to be in the district. So perhaps we need to look at it on the front end in terms of teacher expectation. And if we made sure that every teacher in our school district believes that 100% of our students can exceed proficiency, then we probably will not have to provide any of these supports in the back end. Because a lot of these social issues, in my mind, the most part, we're taking them in the back end as opposed to doing what we need to do in the front end, and that's in terms of having high expectations for our children and doing everything that we can in order to make sure that they succeed academically. I just wanted to relay that since we're talking.
Well, and since you're talking, it's your turn.
Thank you. I sent a question with regard to when we look at the annual salaries. These are average salaries. Why don't we have the annual salaries in here? In my opinion, it seems to me as if we're not being as transparent as we can. We know, for example, the principal over at 33 School makes $237,000, not $125,000. And I think that we are not being fair to the public when we have these salaries that really are not in line with what our employees are actually making, particularly when you have an almost $800 million budget.
The reason why we use the average salaries is because the mobility within the district, which I know is a catch-22 because folks wish there was less movement, but that is the reason why.
This can't just be a snapshot of what we have?
But that's what I was going to say. But I think
Okay.
what we can do going forward is we'll put an addendum in to do a snapshot of just what you ask.
Okay.
Because it's been my practice since I've been here. I've shared with the Finance Committee each year, and it's around February. I give them the highest to the lowest employees' compensation for the previous calendar year. So, I've tried to increase the level of transparency in that fashion. So we'll have an addendum that'll identify everyone's specific level of compensation currently.
Thank you. And then the demographic and attendance information was not listed for each school. I know that we sent a request for that. So what's the status of that?
We're working with the Office of School Operations to develop all that information, and it'll be included in the proposed budget book.
And for the accountability legend, can you have definitions of what those terms mean?
We can add that to the page.
All right, okay. And now on section 4, page 96.
Commissioner,
Oh,
those definitions are in the appendix in the back of the book. We can add them to the page.
probably need to talk up so that you're
I'm sorry.
connected.
There's,
think that's magnified.
those definitions are in the back of the book in the appendix, but we can add them to the.
Yeah, or make some
school
kind of statement that
pages.
says refer to the back of the book or something. All right, so on page 96, section 4, there's a $1.2 million decrease in funding for School 44. Can you explain that? Approximately,
Which page?
section 496, page 96.
Is that because we don't have any pre-K sections?
It went from 3.1 million in 13-14 to 1.9 million.
Yeah, there's no kindergartners projected to be in the school for 14-15 or 7th and 8th grade.
You said no
Kindergartners,
and no 7th and 8th graders?
correct.
All right. And then page 123, why is the funding reduced there for All City High School?
Page 23.
123.
I'm sorry, 123.
Section 4, page 123.
That reflects the enrollment at this particular snapshot in time under the direction of Deputy Superintendent Burrell Moore. We're evaluating our overage, undercredit children across the district, and these numbers, could shift going forward.
Now, does that suggest that this program is not successful?
The program is scheduled to continue for next year. So as Mr. Ansbro just said, this is the picture of All City, considering that we would be graduating and have over 300 of the students for the 13-14 school year. We have a committee that will be meeting that will include myself, parents, teachers, administrators from All City and the new chief beginning next week to take a look at ways that we can serve all of our students who are students who are underage and overcredited.
We went from a high in 2013-14 of 548 to 250. So what's the reason for the reduction in enrollment?
Well, as you know, the program was designed for the phase-in, phase-out. But we do know that it was for that purpose of those schools that were consolidated there. For that population was a short-term approach. Back to you answer, we are learning that throughout this district, we have a significant number of students that are overage and undercredit that could benefit from similar programs. So again, some of those students were Freddie Thomas, they were at the Old Edison, there was at the Bioscience in Franklin. So those schools were to be closed in 2014, this school year, many of them. So what we did was we did put it at Old City High to make sure that they would get the services that they needed.
All right, that's not clear to me, but I'll ask that question in an email because I'm not really satisfied with that.
Let me try to follow up with a question and see if this helps.
I don't need that. I just want you to.
Well, maybe the rest of the board does.
I'll just follow up myself.
Let me ask this for myself then.
I don't need your anecdote.
What I hear, if I can do some active listening here, what I'm hearing you say is that the senior class, the graduating class, was disproportionate across the whole, that because of the consolidation and closing of other schools, the senior class was mushroom size as compared to the 11th, 10th, and 10th grades. And I see from the page 3 that you're adding a 9th grade. So could you just detail out how many graduating seniors there were and how many new ninth graders you're expecting. And then, if you could, get to the heart of Commissioner Elliott's question.
Not here, I don't need to hear, because I don't want to.
Let me finish my question.
No, you let me finish, so that I can understand it.
If I understand the heart of her question being, is All City High success or failure? I would add the question, how many of the students initially enrolled formally dropped out of school, formally submitted paperwork that said, I am old enough to make this decision, I'm not going to stay in school. Hopefully those numbers will tally out so that we can reconcile the difference between 548 and 250.
That's not my question.
But that's my
so
question.
So I will be
Elliott, that is
submitting to
my
you
question.
my email, so that because I'm not clear, or she's not very articulate as far as I'm concerned. So I need to be able to ask my question for me to understand.
I thought you gave up the mic, Commissioner Elliott. If I might ask, going to section 4, page 3, about,
I still wasn't done.
Question.
I was not
we
done.
We go around.
No, you let Mary hold the mic for 30 minutes.
It was about the same question, Commissioner Elliott.
I just have a couple of more. Page 126, the funding for, why is that funding reduced? Section 4, page 126. This is Charlotte. And we have, well, that's not, the enrollment is not that difficult. But why is the funding reduced there?
Looking at a couple things, Commissioner. Number one, our funding, our SIG funding for Charlotte concludes on June 2014, this school year, and there are a number of positions that are funded by that grant that no longer would be continued. Secondly, you can see that based on our realigning the number of assistant principals based on the number of students projected to be in the building, that is a reduction of one assistant principal, I'm sorry. And I think that accounts for the reductions at Charlotte.
And the number of teachers?
That would be, teachers would be those teachers, folks who are funded by the grant that will end in June 2014.
And page 180, we go from actual, under Chief of Schools, from 6.1 million to 29 million proposed under the 2014-15 budget. What's going on there? Page 180. Speaking to the mic,
If you can turn to your package in round 2, page 7, there's a response to the increase in funding around staff and dollars. Typically what we do at the budget book is we centralize a lot of budgets, like these summer school budgets, housed here until we know where it's going to go. Substitute teachers are moved back into here, and then throughout the years they're incurred in the schools, the dollars move there. Title I SAS money is also housed here until the schools develop their plans, then it's moved out. Building subs, again, here until we determine where they'll be in the schools in the fall. Textbook money centralized until the purchases are made. And the budget reserve is also kept here. And if you look at the table on page 7, you can see the dollar and FTE changes there that total the increase in funding.
So why was all that changed and put under there?
This is our standard practice each year. For instance, with the budget reserve, we have to put it somewhere. And since the money typically goes to the schools, we put it in a school chief account. And then again, as things occur throughout the year, if we need to add staff at a particular school or institute a program, then the dollars get transferred into the school. Same with all these other things. Until we know where the need is, we house it centrally. You know, substitute teachers is another example. There's $4.6 million increase in this. So as the teachers' substitutes occur throughout the year, we move the money into the school budgets to cover those things. So it's our typical practice each year that we know that we have a need for this level of funding, but until we know exactly where it should go, we house it here until we develop those plans.
Yeah, but the actual was 6 million and some change from last year. So that doesn't say that all of that funding was appropriated last year.
No, where we're at right now is this is the increase between the February amended budget for this year and the beginning budget for next year. And this is the differential. Our substitute teacher budget's well over $10 million. What we're seeing here is that just a lot of those dollars are in the schools now. And as we reset the budget at the beginning of the year, this is just the differential.
Okay. And then just the last question, on page 200, define for me what it means under the budget expense category, fixed obligation with variability. That sounds kind of oxymoronic to me. Just the definition for that, fixed obligation with variability.
Yeah, that question was also asked in round 2, so I provided for you. It's detailed there.
Toward the end.
Say that again, Mary?
Toward the end.
I'm sorry, say one more time.
It would be toward the end of round 2 questions, because it was my question, and they were.
It's on page 22. It's right at the top, 22.
I don't see that, yeah.
It's on page 21. It's question number 135. And I agree with you, Commissioner. Fixed obligations with variability does seem a bit of an oxymoron.
So give me an example of what we're talking about, Vern.
It's special ed, and it's basically costs that we can't make go away. They're fixed, but they do, the amount does change. That's where you get your title.
Okay, gotcha.
So
Okay.
like special ed tuition, our contracts for transportation, charter school tuition.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
Even things like
And they
utilities.
fall- and the large amount of these fall into school categories because these are pretty much direct school services
All right.
in every case.
Thank you.
All done?
All done.
Okay. School number, the Wilson Foundation Academy is scheduled to expand from K2 and 6A to K3 and 5A. Now, I can understand the grow out from K2 becomes K3 in subsequent years, but since no other school is dropping a 5th grade, where are we getting the students for the 5th grade in Wilson Foundation? And doesn't it make more sense, rather than recruiting students to come in and fill a 5th grade that does not actually exist, from other schools and potentially create the same kind of holes in classrooms that charter schools do. Doesn't it just make sense to just continue the K-2 grow out and let the fourth grade teachers stay in the buildings they're at and the fourth grade students stay in the building they're at? I'm actually just looking at section 4, page 4, where it delineates the grade configurations. And the Wilson Foundation Academy strategy for expansion simply doesn't make sense to me.
Commissioner Powell, regretfully, I believe that the plan to add grade 5 is an error in this book. Initially, 2 years ago, our plan was to have grade 5, and at that time, the school was not successful in attracting 5th grade, so the decision was to have the school grow up, beginning with kindergarten, and just as you mentioned, grades 2 will go to 3. I will tell you that we will be adding about 25 additional students for the grade 7 and 8 at that school for next year.
What about the 6th grade? Again, because it's an arbitrary start and our elementary schools go to 6th grade, where are we even going to get new 6th graders if we don't actively recruit from other schools?
At this time, there is no plan to recruit 6th graders. We have been able to have, or that school has been able to keep their 6th grade class, and we continue to support it.
Okay, but in the configuration page then, are you telling me that it's going to be K3 and 7 through 8? Because that would make a certain amount of sense. It currently says K3 and 6 through 8. I'm sorry, K3 and 5 through 8. Should that read 7 through 8?
No,
you're going to start up a new 6th grade.
We have continued. This year we have a 6th grade class. Last year we've had a 6th grade class. So we've been able to attract and/or keep students there for 6th grade because of the middle years IB program.
So there is a certain degree of recruiting going on.
No, I would say that parents, by looking at the course selection book, make that selection at that point. We are not recruiting.
So a passive recruitment through the choice plan. But the thing is, most parents get the choice book at 6-7. So most parents, unless it's through word of mouth, don't even know that this is an option because they haven't been sent the book until their children are already in the 6th grade. And there's a certain degree of, I'll just state my opinion for the record, there's a certain degree of inequity there, precisely the same inequity that was the grounds under which the board adopted its school choice policy, that only the parents who are in the know to go looking for a middle years IB program. Everybody else is put in a position where they're reacting to the district's calendar, reacting to the district's choice system, and frankly, most of the time, if they start asking questions in the 5th grade, are told they don't have any choices until the 7th grade. So they can either believe the official language, which is, we don't actively recruit, and if they believe that, then they missed their one and only opportunity. This is the singular reason why I supported combining middle and high schools. So we had one transition from 6th grade to 7th, that we only had one focal point for our choice efforts, and that nobody was left behind or treated inequitably because of it. But thank you for your answer about the 5th grade. I trust this page is going to get changed when we make the official publication. East High, is today the deadline for our the EPO responses?
The sick thing, it is,
Tomorrow is the
Yeah.
deadline, okay.
it's approaching.
I
No, I
guess
thought
I
it was
need to
May.
save that question for the
Oh,
the
for-
third deliberation session. Welcome, Commissioner White. I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge you when you walked in. We're still on section 4. Everyone has had one opportunity to ask questions, but many board members asked many or all of their questions when they had the floor. So take as much time as you need on section 4.
Well, I won't take long at all. Again, I'm sure Commissioner Powell told you I was over at City Hall attending a public hearing on early childhood learning sponsored by the mayor, so I apologize I could not be here on time. It actually started at 6 o'clock as well. You know, I want to I want to first acknowledge my colleagues. I've been here for, I think this is my 7th year, and these are probably, I'm just looking through the questions, the most extensive, probative questions I've seen in many years. We've had good questions in the past, but there's a lot of questions here, and they cover a lot of ground, and the answers are pretty thorough as compared to years past. So I wanted to acknowledge everybody's work in asking the questions and getting answers. And I'm just going through some of them now, but what catches my attention is, and it won't surprise anybody, I'm frequently interested in data, which is strange for a lawyer. But I'm interested in data, and I'm really focused on, you know, whether our programming is worthy of continued funding. And what is consistent with these papers that is, with years past, is that there's often a lack of answers to questions regarding data. That has always been the case. You ask whether the investment that we're making is working, and what has always surprised me is we don't establish benchmarks before we implement or offer the funding, and then we subsequently, much to my surprise, because this is an area that I have a lot of experience in other than here, we don't have the data to assess whether what we're doing is working. I came in the tail end of discussion about All City. And again, I apologize, I don't know that I heard the full and complete answer, but it sounded to me like the data is not in just yet, right? And then I looked at a question that I think I asked. It's page 17 for the questions dated March 28, 2014. And I won't keep you guys too long, but because the point I make is thematic. If you look at page 17, I think I was the one who asked the question, expanded learning, when will we know, or somebody else might have asked it, and we were thinking the same thing, when will the board be able to review comprehensive school-level analyses of expanded learning effectiveness? And what we get is 6 points, all telling us that 6 different organizations have assessed this, but we don't have any data yet. And I'll just to belabor the point, because that's what us lawyers do when we're trying to make a point. Synergy Enterprise will complete its analysis by March 31st, 2014, and will submit it to the Ford Foundation. It's not too clear when we will get it. It says the Board of Education will get it as soon as possible. Presumably, hopefully, that would be before we vote on whether to continue this exercise in expanded learning. Point number 2 says, New York University Metro Center is doing an analysis, provides the name of the lead researcher, says this will be available by the end of April, and the team will be visiting to share their findings. Presumably, before we invest probably millions and millions of dollars into expanded learning, we would get the results of this, but perhaps not, since it's coming at the end of April. Point 3, National Center for Time and Learning has conducted a fall and spring progress monitoring, and that will be shared by April the 15th, it tells us. It looks like the results of these, that's today, right? Point 4, Rochester Area Community Foundation, same thing. Results of the assessments are not site-specific, but inform overall planning and continuous improvement. Point 5, Synergy Enterprise. Another report will be available by September the 1st, 2014. Now, let me just make the point, and my colleagues don't have to worry about me asking multiple questions, because I think I can make the point very clearly. This is not acceptable. Do you really, I'm asking this rhetorically, no one has to respond, does anybody really expect the Board of Education to invest in a program that has been at least ongoing for maybe a year and a half to 2 years.
That is not correct, I'm
Well,
sorry.
but
Only
Mis-
half it-
Mr.
let me-
Superintendent,
I would
Mr.
like to
Superintendent,
correct the
no,
record. It's
Mr., you
not
can do
correct.
that after I'm finished speaking. I don't interrupt you, I ask for the same courtesy. I am making a point, and I indicated as a rhetorical point. No one honestly expects, and let me just answer the question, do not expect this particular board member to vote for an initiative that's costing the taxpayers millions and millions of dollars without data to support that it's working. I think that's a simple, reasonable request. It's part of our fiduciary responsibility, and more importantly, it's a part of our responsibility to ensure the successful administration of programs to children who fall on the bottom of the bucket for the New York State's graduation rates, for New York State's ELA and math scores. We need to know what the benchmarks are. We need to know what the before and after is. We need to know whether these programs are working. And I do not think for a minute that anybody intentionally said, let's offer the final analysis after the budget is voted on. But I'm telling you, at its face level, I don't know how anybody can responsibly vote for the extensive amount of money that supports this, what may be a very effective program, without knowing what the data is. We have 6 points, and not a single one of them answers the question. Well, it does, actually. It says, I asked, when will we be able to review the comprehensive school level analysis of expanded learning's effectiveness? Well, you did answer that question, to be fair. You did answer the question. But ultimately, what I'm looking for, and I'm sure my colleagues are looking for, and what this community is looking for, is whether this investment works. I will go one step further. I have heard there are organizations in this community that say it is not working. I just want to be honest, that it is not working. I need to know whether they're wrong. In addition to not wanting to spend that kind of money, I want to know that what our kids are getting is working. And if it's not working, maybe it's not that expanded learning as a concept is wrong, because I've supported this concept from the very beginning when the superintendent started talking about it. But it's a question of, it may be a question of effectiveness and how it is being administered. You can't begin to make those assessments unless you have the data. And the question for us will be, are we going to continue to support this without the data? Now, Mr. Superintendent, if you wanted to remark on my rhetorical question, feel free to do so.
Hey, can I just ask you?
Thank you,
can I just
Commissioner
ask you
White.
Your question. You said extended learning and when you say extended learning, you're talking about expanded day as well as the summer.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner White, and sorry, I just wanted for the record, because we do have 5 schools here that are part of the expanded learning, and thank you, Commissioner Evans. And the reason I wanted to interrupt, because the same question came last time, and I gave the same response. I believe that you have a child at school 23, right?
Yes.
So you know this better than I know anybody else, because your child goes to school 23. This program began in September of 2013. Let's just be clear here. The first assessment that we took, New York State assessment, which is, President White, you are correct, data are important, and you had different type of data. One important data for this district that had 37 schools that right now are being either priority school or focus school in the New York State is the New York State assessment. We just gave it to, just this past week, gave the English language art. Next week, when children are coming back, we're giving math. We won't get those results until the summer. So the reason you see us deferring, by the way, the good answer in here is that we do have right now engaging in the evaluation. So we are not waiting on telling you we will have the evaluation when the data is here. But at the end of the day, I do believe that you have the same goal in here, and that is that we continue to improve our school as measured by New York State standards.
And by our standards, hopefully.
But I say because that is the primary assessment goal and objective in which this district is held accountable.
What about our standards?
And we will put in our standards as well. But the evaluation will not be completed until you look at the New York State standard. Now, what I will tell you right now in terms of attendance, in terms of what teachers are telling us, what we are looking in terms of the evaluation, part of those, we're implementing this program with fidelity by a third-party reviewer, so that it won't be the superintendent or central office. But I will say, to be fair, I will say that it's unfair, unwise, and unreasonable to expect that a program that even haven't completed a year, I mean, the school year is not even over, and just started on September of this year. As far as the extended learning, that is a requirement for our priority school from New York State. This Board of Education don't have a choice. You had to provide at least 200 hours or more instruction to our kid to any school that is a priority school. So let me just, and I just want to be clear on that, because Commissioner Evans brought this point earlier. And you said to me, we got to make sure that we explain to the public, which I think is a very wise suggestion, what is earmark? What are those dollars that this Board of Education receive from the state or federal government that you only can spend it for certain purpose? And there are 200 hours of investment that New York State require us to do. It's sort of like, for example, every school has to have a school principal. This Board of Education cannot decide to run a school without school principal, nor can we run school that is a priority school without the 200 hours. So I'm sorry for jumping, but I just want that clarity to be clear. We did cover this in our last session. I do understand and have an appreciation for data, but I want to be clear, as we have a parent here that attend that school. Actually, I had two. Commissioner Power, a child goes, maybe I had three.
Well, 2 at school 23.
But they know that what I'm telling here is the truth. This program just started on September. Any expert will tell you that you don't evaluate a program, you don't judge the program in the first 6 months or 7 months. Now, what this board could expect is that we are an ongoing evaluating the implementation of the program, and by this September, we will have the first result, the first year result. Thank you for allowing me for the clarification.
Just a follow-up to that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember, it has to at least be a year and a half ago, that the concept of extended day, I want to make sure I got the definitions right, expanded learning was introduced at Northwest Prep, the former Frederick Douglass campus, with much fanfare. So that is at least a year and a half, 2 years ago, right? Frederick Douglass.
That is incorrect.
Well, how long ago did we introduce?
We didn't introduce the expanded learning. What we're saying here, what I say here for Northeast and Northwest, that this district, which, by the way, you have given me credit, and thank you, was offering the least amount of instructional time to our children. And I went into this community, the business community, Wegmans, and I say, I need your help. And they step to the plate, risk their investment, and say, Bohen, we cannot give our children in this district, who all of us saying that we are going through, are the poorest, are the most needy, and yes, we are giving our children the least amount of instructional time. Thank you, Mr. Wegmans. Thank you to the business community. Thank you to the family that say we need to take that step. And then I follow and I said, we need to plan well. And we need to find a thorough action here that say that any school that want to participate in expanded learning in this district, I repeat, had to participate on a well-thought-out plan, and 1 year planning, which we did. And we said the only school that I would recommend to the Board of Education for expanded learning is either a priority school or one in which the National Center for Time and Learning will certify that school. So again, the least amount of instructional time when I first arrived to the district, no one was talking about. You have acknowledged that is common sense, that the children who need the most, it is indefensible to offer them the least amount of instructional time.
But Dr. Vargas, I don't disagree that you found us in a place where we didn't have our kids in the seats when they needed to be in the seat. That's not my question. My question relates, sir, to what happened at Northeast Northwest Prep. My understanding was that that was offered as an extended day, expanded learning environment. And I recall that when Wegmans couldn't do what they had hoped to do, and no one's questioning the generosity and commitment of Paul and Mr. Wegman and all, that's not the issue here, not at all. And furthermore, it's not the issue of whether you were doing the right thing. That's not the issue. We're trying to address a serious deficiency within the district. The amount of time the kids were in their seats when compared to suburban districts was shameful. That's not the point. The question is simply this. When we had moved towards that model, expanded day, extended learning, and I might add, I do recall when we found out that Wegmans couldn't do exactly what we needed them to do, the board ended up passing a resolution, and I think the resolution uses the language extended day or expanded day to compensate for what Wegmans could not do, notwithstanding their great generosity. My point is, that model, and this is my question at this particular point, that model was inaugurated almost 2 years ago, right?
Incorrect.
Well, okay, how long, just answer, how long ago was it?
The model that I have suggested to you is national certified model.
No, sir, I'm asking you about Wegmans and Northeast Northwest Prep, and I'm asking for a particular reason, not to trap you, but to say, okay, this wasn't just 6 months ago. We inaugurated this model, perhaps not perfectly, but we inaugurated this model about 2 years ago, a year and 3 quarters ago, and my question is, this is why I'm asking the question, where is the data on that one? You're focused on something that just began 6 months ago. I'm asking you, where's the data on the Wegmans model that was inaugurated probably about at least a year and a half ago to 2 years ago? And the reason why I'm asking, it's not to trap anybody, but to understand the value of that particular approach, whether it worked or not. Is there an analysis or data of that particular initiative?
We do have the data, and I believe Karina had that report, right? Am I correct? So we can provide to you, and we have provided to you, but we will provide it again.
In summary, what did the...
Let me just...
Sir, I'm asking the questions, please. What did that report tell us?
That report told us that during that year,
yes,
the school, and one of the reasons we went with a sense of urgency, was assigned by the New York State as a priority school. And that the state in the middle of that model sent us a letter that you had to restructure the school. And that's when the driver, where we used to have the 2 high school there, 7, 12. And this Board of Education submitted a plan, which Carolina could explain it to us, that was approved by the state, in which it was responding to pretty much, we were given 6 weeks, right? Karina, would you mind to help me with this in terms of what happened to the priority? Then we divided the school into a middle and a high school, and she will give you more an extensive answer about what happened when we received the letter and that we were forced to basically restructure the 2
Okay, but I want to be clear about my question. My question isn't what did we do? My question is, what did the data show us after the program was initiated? How did those students fare? Not what did the state do, not what did we have to do in response to what the state, what did the data show was the success, and I really don't know, I genuinely don't know, or failure, or what did it say about what happened in the wake of that initiative, that effort? That's what I want to know.
So we have data regarding the NWEA assessments that were given particularly for 7th and 8th graders that demonstrated increased accelerated growth rates for their RIT scores, which is the assessment of that NWEA. We can provide that data summary from last school year. We have faced significant challenges on that campus with the implementation. I acknowledge it, we own it. We are working with Generation Schools as part of the strategy under their current school improvement grant in strengthening what that model is, which formats more of a connected
career pathways approach, which is one of the SIG goals for that school.
Excuse me, because just want to focus in on my question. I have every confidence that you are trying to rectify the issues there. My question relates to data, right? So you've indicated there was one data point, which I think you said was right.
So NWA,
Right.
the assessments that were conducted for 7th and 8th graders
Showed
on
improvement.
that campus showed improvement.
Okay.
We also have the number of credits that were recovered for 9th through 12th grade students based on the expanded learning time and credit recovery options that they were offered, including January pass rates for Regents exams for this year.
So
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
So was the 7th and 8th grade for Northeast superior to Northwest at that time point? Significantly superior to Northwest?
There were different
The 7th
starting
and 8th
points.
graders.
There were different starting points for the
No,
schools.
but at end of that school year,
do you mean
was there a significant delta between 7th and 8th graders at Northeast versus 7th and 8th graders at Northwest?
A change in the acceleration rate of the students at those schools between pre, mid, and
I'm
post-assessment?
not even looking for growth or change, I'm talking static. 7th and 8th grade Northwest, 7th and 8th grade Northeast.
We can do that. We can have that data available. I don't know it off the top of my head from last year.
The whole point of this conversation, obviously, we can't have the exhaustive conversation here, but to look at multiple data points, I assume you would do that. The NWA, is that what you call it?
NWA measures of
Right,
academic
right.
progress.
That's one area. And I think the point that Commissioner Adams is making is, you got to be able to suggest that it was what was done uniquely at one particular campus got unique and different results. This is the kind of analysis that I think responsible analysis that you make when you're considering spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. And my problem is, and I don't want anybody to think I'm picking on anybody. This is good government. This is examining how we're spending money. And the point I was making earlier is, when I read those 6 points, is all these analyses will come in after this board will make a decision. And I'm not saying it's anybody's fault, but if the analysis comes in and says, this is not working, and by the way, I will tell you, there are people, reputable organizations, that are suggesting that it's not working. So if the data comes, this is my concern, and people can think I'm picking on an initiative or not. Well, that's your responsibility. But I want to be clear about this. If the data comes in April, late April, or May, or I think there's a September on here, September 1st, and it says hypothetically, it's not working, I don't want to be a part of that scenario. So my hope would have been the earliest program that we have out there, which was Northeast.
And School 9.
And School 9, that we would have had data presented to us to tell us whether that works or not.
For School 9, we have data that we've had positive impact as compared to the growth rates of other schools.
Can you present that to us? Not
We can
today.
present that to you.
That would be helpful.
For Northeast College Prep, we had significant challenges with the secondary implementation on that campus involving a change in the model. We were going from a volunteer-based model to one that was teacher-provided and community-provided. We engaged that staff in summer redesign, which engaged Generation Schools of Brooklyn and Denver that does an expanded learning framework in helping us build staff capacity for implementation. And we have had other challenges on that campus related to the implementation of their school improvement grant, which the state, which Dr. Vargas was referencing, required us to create an initial plan for stabilization of that campus and the structure overall, as well as a plan for future improvements for year 2 of implementation.
So my follow-up written questions, my follow-up question, which I don't expect an answer now, would be, can you provide me an analysis of what happened at Northeast and at number 9 school with multiple data points and doing a comparative analysis like Commissioner Adams suggests? That's what I want. Thank you.
We have that information. Again, I want to be clear from a budget point of view. What you have in Northeast was 1 year basic on volunteer. Thank you to Wegmans and all the business community. Volunteer. The one that was required model, that now is required by the state of New York, that you added 2 additional hours. So let me just repeat. It is required. This Board of Education doesn't have the authority to, sometimes you wish and sometimes the community wish, that we have such a latitude. To say, I'm not going to give the student today at Northeast and Northwest the extended learning 200 hours. The first year model is independent of the second year, again, voluntarily, to one that now need to be approved by the state in New York, which was approved in a plan, which we had to report, by the way, to the state every 8 weeks. Carolina and I are in conversation, giving them update on this. When it comes to investment, I just want to be sure, President White, because you missed the meeting about investment. We have to be very careful that what do we have control of. The extended learning for a number of our schools is not an option. We had to provide it. And it's a different model. Let's say a school number 9, that school 23 is an option. School number 9 is required.
Could I follow
Not
up?
as many as 300 hours, but at least 200.
On that point specifically, why was extended hours of instruction not one of the options the state articulated to us for East High School?
So it is part of the requirement of their priority school status. And so they've had what's been called Cafe 22 available there at East High School, which utilizes the Title I additional allocation to support tutoring and Regents preparation programming for at least 50% of the students throughout the course of the school year.
So that's something that's been going on since it was initially identified as a priority school some 2 years ago?
Right, and so there's been Cafe 22, or there's different tutoring programs that were incorporated into the school model. Because they didn't have an approved school improvement grant currently in this school year, they did not have full implementation for the whole school available, as does Wilson, Monroe, and Douglas, Northwest College Prep.
And why didn't they have a plan?
They didn't have a school improvement grant. They had a school improvement grant for 3 years, which expired last August, or June or August. I don't remember the end date.
Also, the initial grant for school didn't require the extended learning. This is a rule that the state just passed a year ago. So last year, when you went the front end like East, they didn't benefit from that. This is something new. Again, interesting question to ask, and it was once again that a lot of those schools needed to do more for our students than they were doing. That's the assumption here, that if you want to do more for kids, you're going to need more time.
Commissioner Powell, if I could just summarize, I understand legally what the superintendent is saying about it is our obligation to offer extended day. We don't have any choice. But let me be clear. What is also not a choice is for this district to continue to offer programs and not evaluate them. I'll give you one other example, colleagues. And this is a point worth repeating because it's a point that I've had to make ever since I've been on this board, and it's not just this particular administration. I asked, this is the March 31st questions. This is a pattern. I ask, it's page 1. I say, when and what schools did the district last fund ATS, alternatives to suspension? What was the cost to operate that? Now listen to the answer. The answer on page 1 is, a comprehensive analysis of alternative to suspension program is being compiled. We should know in advance whether this particular program was working. And then look at the follow-up question. What have been the indicators, suspension, attendance, those are examples, since the elimination of ATS at those schools? Listen to the answer. A comprehensive analysis of alternatives to suspension program is being compiled. How could we have, now this is sort of the reverse. This is a program that the district has moved away from. The other one, extended day, expanded learning, is a program that the district has moved towards. My concern is the pattern is consistent here. There's no data available for many of these programs. And that's problematic. We are making decisions, or decisions are being made without us being involved, that relate to the effectiveness of program without the data being available. Someone should have been able to say when this questionnaire was submitted on March 31st, well, here's the data on ATS. It did not work. So that's why we defunded it. Or it is working in certain schools, and that's why we continue to use it. That's a problem, colleagues, when we don't have data to support our actions, which affect the lives of our children, and we don't have data that supports our fiduciary responsibilities, that's a problem. And it's not just relating to the program that I just referred to. This has happened repeatedly. We have to fix this. And I would respectfully submit, one of the ways to fix it is to say, we will no longer fund those programs where vendors or the district, and I've made this point multiple times, cannot support it with data. At some point, we've got to get to that point as a board. We've got to say we're not going to continue to do this. We will hold vendors accountable, but we're not holding ourselves accountable. We made a major move on ATS without having data to support it. That's unacceptable. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Mary.
So just adding support to President White's position, I'm going to read the question that I submitted regarding extended learning that remains unanswered. This is not asking for any analysis or retroactive, judgments. This is asking for current descriptive data, pure data.
Can you tell us what page you're on?
Page 24.
Of the
Of our current questions, of round 2 questions.
Of the April 7th.
Number 140. And what I ask is, to what extent, if at all, are the costs of operating extended learning programs included in these budgets? Are they in the budgets for the school or not? How much variability is there across extended learning schools in excess staffing costs for extra pay versus staffing accomplished through staggered teacher schedules, staggered school, and community-based offering, organization staffing coverage, et cetera? This is just a straightforward operational question about the schools that have extended learning in them. Could we please have current year expenditures and staffing hours on extended learning for the pilot Center of Time Learning schools? So I'm identifying that as a specific subgroup, those 5 schools, acknowledging that all the other schools where we have extended learning are in fact extended learning pilots and experiments. And then finally, what are the actual expenditures for programming and contracts and consultants for each school this year? And has there been an analysis of variances across those schools? So this is just existing data that could help inform our understanding of these budgets. And it can inform not effectiveness questions, but it can inform efficiency questions, because that stuff matters too. So again, if we could get straightforward questions answered, it would help us move forward and narrow down our process. I have a specific question about the priority school requirement for extra hours or for extended learning time. So is every single school that's labeled as priority is required to have extended hours, extended learning time? Yes or no?
The answer is yes when you submit the plan.
And then and it's 200 for each school? That's the number for each school?
For priority school, minimum of 200.
Okay, is there a requirement from the state for any other schools, like focus schools?
No.
Okay. And then for those 200 extra hours, are those expected to cover 100% of students?
Depending in the context of the plan, like, for example, there are some of those grants that we got it in September. For some of them, if you are not going to offer for a certain student, then you could have an explanation. And like, for example, we have Hillside scholarship student that are in good standing, who don't necessarily, one can demonstrate, for example, that they have a job, that they have all their activity, and that they don't necessarily are in need of particular intervention.
So specific students who meet some criteria can be exempted, but not like percentages of schools, students?
I believe, Karina, the way it's written, that we must offer those services to them, but again, you have some, you don't have a luxury to say, I won't offer. But
Okay.
if you have a subpopulation in there, like I said, at the high school level, in particular cases where you have significant number of kids that might be working, and you have and you put it in your plan, or you can put an addendum. You could, for example, say that you will do X, but you find out that a significant number of kids, for whatever reason, in this case, let's say work, can participate. You could make you could ask for, I think it's an F10 form. You had, yeah, that you had to submit it and then get the approval of the state for their variance.
So except for those specific students that file a form and get exempted individually by their individual criteria, 100% of students are expected to attend, or is it optional? Because I'm hearing the difference between you must offer versus...
The answer, the burden of proof here, my understanding, you had to prove, you had to offer. You have 50%, prove at least 50% participation. Now, there are times, just like the state required, that it's 95% participation, and in terms of the testing requirement. And then you don't meet those goals, but you had to have an explanation to why you didn't get to where you need to be.
Okay, so it's 50% participation, and unless you have specific exemptions, and it's for priority schools. Okay, thank you.
School improvement grant, it would require the percentage approved through that grant application.
Another way you can...
So the state is requiring it for all priority schools, but each priority school is subject to negotiation, what percent of students must
Correct. You
be
put it in
involved?
your plan, and in your plan you document, for example, let's say that you are dealing with school, the challenge in the East face. You have and you will see that in the overage and on the credit. Well, those kids, before the state came with this, we said that they needed more time to catch up. I mean, that's just common sense. And if in your demographic, that population you find in your data, to use President White example, you have to respond to the needs of that population and make the case how you're going to meet those needs.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the questions that Commissioner Evans was asking about the layoffs, I guess, or displacements, that's what my question is about layoffs. And I don't have it with me, but there was a presentation when you first presented the budget. I think you had a nice table where you had each employee category, and then based on predicted estimates for retirements and other forms of movement, and then moving to different positions. I think you predicted little or no layoffs in any category. Can you review that for me if I'm remembering that right, and give me an updated picture? Because what I think I heard you saying for the example we were talking about is that there are going to be a number of layoffs, right?
That's correct.
So,
I use the word minimal.
Okay, so could you review by employee category the numbers of layoffs anticipated?
Yeah, Bethany could.
We've done a preliminary analysis of that. I don't have it with me right now. I could give you that in a spreadsheet form. But those numbers, I think, right now would not appear accurate as to what's going to happen at the end. I think because it's by tenure area, things that might happen with the East reorganization, with what's going on, retirements and resignations and those types of things have a very significant effect on how that's going to work. So based upon the retirements and what we know right now and what's allocated in the budget right now, we've done that analysis, but we expect that kind of, those numbers would shift significantly. There aren't many tenure areas that have more than a few reductions, so 1 or 2 retirements or changes in FTE allocations due to student enrollment could affect those numbers quite a bit.
Okay, so I think that, and I'm just recalling it from memory, but it was not specific. It was based on just predictions and understanding of
right
sort of anticipated predicted ranges. If that could be updated as well as the spreadsheet, so that we could get, it would still be, well understood that this is not final, but it could be more well-informed by where we are at in terms of our knowledge of shifting numbers.
Right. From
That would be
what I recall, the table that was originally presented was sort of on whole numbers. This is our usual attrition rate.
right.
And this is, this is the number of reductions in the budget, and this is our usual attrition.
Right.
On a macro scale. So we have gone deeper into that
Okay.
analysis to do
So I don't know
the
how
actual
hard that would be
area.
to shift your real analysis with those whole number analyses and just make it as close to reality as you can, predicting.
Right.
Based
So-
on what you know the difference will be
So we
between
can
now
try to
and
get
then.
that to you as soon as possible. There have been, since we've done the initial analysis, there has been some more changes, so we can
Okay.
update that and
All
get
right.
that to you as soon as
Thank you.
possible.
Before we
great.
move off that topic, though, given what Mr. Ansbro told us about the teacher's assistants versus the paras, that's going to have perhaps a more significant impact than any other
Right.
movement in those categories, I would expect to see considerable shift. Those are areas that we don't have necessarily a lot of retirements, because as positions, they haven't existed very long, right? Those are
Right.
cases where any attrition will in fact be people choosing to leave versus being laid off. Is that correct?
I would have to look at the specific data. I mean, a number of our teaching assistants have been were paras in the district before they became teaching assistants. The change to teaching assistants actually will be beneficial because we did hire a number of teaching assistants last year for the ISS room, so there will be less reductions in that area, and those are our newest employees in the RAP unit. So, but before I gave you any kind of, I'd hate to generalize and then find out when I looked at the data that it wasn't, my assumptions weren't right, so I'd like to get that data to you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And then regarding, on page 158, the STEM budget, the enrollment goes from 620 to 536, and I'm interested in knowing if that includes predicted recruitment into the P-TECH program, if that goes forward.
Commissioner, at the time the draft budget book was developed, the P-TECH program was not included.
Okay, so then that means that the P-TECH program is not reflected in STEM's budget at all or staffing at all?
Not in the draft budget, no.
Okay, when could we get the P-TECH budget? And I'm assuming it would be an addition to STEM. Would it be an addition to the STEM budget?
So part of the P-TECH initiative is to have 125 students added to the cohort who would be following in the, or participating in the framework of that program. So I don't have my information right now, but we will have 2 strands. Some of those students, 125 of them, will be P-TECH students.
So 2 125 student strands within STEM?
So for our 9th grade, for our 9th grade group, I'm going to ask Katerina to refine that for us, since she is the school innovation grants person responsible. But we will have 125 students who will be part of the P-TECH cohort. Will go 9 through 14. That's starting right now.
So it'll be a 250 cohort at STEM?
Right. For total cohort, right now there are 3 academies at STEM High School. One is an IT academy, a health science academy, and an engineering academy. That IT academy, grades 10 through 12, will continue to grow up in the current model. The 9th grade will be replaced by the P-TECH cohort. And so that P-TECH implementation at STEM will actually help to strengthen the already existing IT academy and strengthen the focus of that IT Academy with the enhanced partnership with Monroe Community College and the opportunity for students to earn their associate's degree as part of that P-TECH pathway.
Okay, so when can we expect to see P-TECH added to the STEM budget?
In the next iteration,
It'll be included in the proposed budget after all these details are ironed out and the budget's fully developed.
You know, let me back up, and the reason why I said if this program goes forward, is this actually a school board approved program? I know that we approved a grant allocation to MCC to collaborate on developing this, and I know that we last month allocated money to a project administrator, but is this program actually board approved? It's being called a new school, it's being called a new school, and it's recruiting students, but is this is, I guess, a process question. Does this require board approval? Because I don't think we have approved it.
This is a grant-driven program, and we received a grant which got the approval, as you mentioned, through Monroe Community College, and also the grant that went to the state. And we did receive the grant. So the choice for the school board would be to say, we will renege on the grant and return the $400,000 should you do that. There are implications for that. It will have to be approved by this board through the budget process.
Through the budget process, or do we actually have to approve this as an
And
academic?
the grant process was approved.
Right, we approved that already, and I voted for it, for the grant to be allocated to MCC to work on developing this program. My concern, and you've seen my emails and my concerns and questions, is that we're hastily moving forward recruiting students without having a well-developed program. And I'm very, very concerned about this, because that's the last thing we need is another hastily thrown together program without leadership. We just received a technical grant, a technical evaluation, very, very thorough expert opinions on our district-wide CTE programs. One of their main concerns was that we don't have qualified CTE leadership in programs that we have up and running. And we have an IT program, as you said, at STEM. If there are problems even with specialized leadership, then, I think we all should be very concerned, and we should ask for evidence of strong programs, strong academic articulation, and leadership that simply addresses what our own district's analysis through the CTE expert showed. I mean, even if it's just a very rote process of, they say this, how are we addressing that? There's a lot of holes right now, as far as I can see.
So we are working with the P-TECH director that we have on board, has experience in our CSD as a teacher and also as an employee of our IT department in terms of the work-based experience. The MCC project director, which is part of the contract agreement, offers someone that is a retired school principal at a high school and also has been working with the workforce development through Regional Economic Development Council. So he brings his expertise both as that high school principalship as well as his expertise with the workforce development, which is aligned with this P-TECH program. Together, they bring an ideal combination of leadership. I will be providing a steering committee and governance structure, which includes all of the advisory capacities, both of the New York State offices, which are doing this replication in 14 different districts at the same time as part of this grant agreement. That's something I will have prepared for you by the close of the week. Additionally, we have this program is part of a strategy to strengthen the overall IT Academy, recognizing that there are gaps in the current structure.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Sage.
Any time left?
We have as much time as we're willing to spend on it. What I am concerned about is that we're still essentially on section 4 questions.
You know, on the basis of all the questions that have gone out there, plus the conversation tonight, I'm questionless. I'll send you an email on some minor things that I've got here, but I do want to get some opportunity to get some feedback. If you haven't already done, like I came in a few minutes late, with respect to follow up on my concerns with regard to the Director of Latino Achievement. If there isn't any, if you can.
There wasn't any conversation about that
All
at
right,
all.
so if you can send me an update, let's not get into that tonight.
Okay.
Just send me an update, written update of what's going on with that. Also the Commissioner Campos' newcomers model type program for newly arrived Latino students. We talked about that. So if you could send me a written update on that as well, that would be helpful. I think for future conversations, we should probably I'd like to see us have a conversation at the board level in terms of what we saw and heard at East High School the other night. I think there's one of the lessons that I walked away from when I heard many of the parents was, you know, we had a lot of fervor, we had a lot of emotion at the end of year 3. I would like to see that emotion and that fervor at the beginning at year 1, so that we have enough time and opportunity to begin to correct things that we need to. So by the time we get to year 3, we don't need that fervor and that emotion. So I think what we need from you, at least for me, I'm talking speaking on behalf of the other commissioners, but at least for me, we can do this later after the budget stuff, but some report as to where our schools are now with respect to year 1, 2, and 3. A. B. What is the projection of where they are so that we don't get to an East High School and some of the things that we can begin doing now so we don't get to that point. And I think this is a much larger conversation, but I think it's something a conversation we really do need to have. So on that basis, that's like I said, I'll send some other stuff by email, so I'm good.
Chairman Powell, I just wanted to note, my colleagues probably saw an email, I know the superintendent did, where I had indicated the same concern, and that I'm affectionately referring to it as a pipeline report. We need to know what schools would be receiving the letter that East High School got this year at the same time next year, because you know, one of the frustrations that people expressed during that East High meeting was that the time frame for us responding by the state was rather truncated, even though we got a 2-week extension. But the reality is, as I said this in a recent email and referring to this pipeline report that I'm asking that you generate, Mr. Superintendent, is if this happens again to us next year, it's our fault. There is no reason why, and at a leadership meeting, Dr. Vargas identified one school. The concern I had, though, was the commissioner was at a meeting at Greece High School saying there were multiple schools, he didn't use the phrase pipeline like I have, that were coming down the alley, and that Rochester was looking at multiple schools. So I'm in total agreement, and again, if you look at your email, I suggest about a week ago that we prepare such a list, that we get out ahead of this issue, and that if there's planning that, you know, we don't need the state to send us a letter that says you got 5 options. We don't need, as you have indicated, we could create an EPO option ourselves at any time. We don't need the state to tell us to do that. So if there are schools that are in need of that as an option, or phase in, phase out, we have all that stuff readily available to us now, and there's no reason why. I've said to people, we may get a letter from the state next year on multiple schools, but one thing that will not happen next year is we will know in advance what those schools are, and we will already have a plan in place to turn those schools around. So the letter from the state that we would get would be a moot issue. That's this cannot, I think you're absolutely right, this cannot repeat itself next year. And the notion that we would know what's in the pipeline, be prepared for it, so then when that letter does come, and it probably will come, remediation efforts will already be underway.
Section 5.
If I may follow up.
Follow up.
Same point. In addition to that, I think what's even more critical is that we help to understand the parents of those students who were very confused the other night. However, this information has been trickling out about East High being in trouble for a couple years now. So it's not, for many people, it's a surprise because they've never quite integrated that information. But I think our job is to help parents and teachers there at that particular school, wherever it might be, to understand the implications that there could be another East High in our future if we don't all pull together and figure out how to deal with this issue before we get there.
Yes,
And so the parent component to this is extremely important because they could drive a lot of this effort.
Sure.
Right? They could really drive it. So I think at East the other night, they were saying, yes, we want to drive it. The problem is that, the train's already left the station. But in future events, they could play an important role in this. And if they don't, and they wait till, the 11th hour and the 59th minute, then it's shame on them. But at least we will have made every effort to make sure that folks understand what's going on.
Well, it's an excellent point, and I think it's the right thing to do, and my hope is that, my hope, you will have that list. I mean, you generate that list, and then at the same time, we have to be sensitive, and that's what I think this summer, beginning in July, that's the first order of business, because you will have the first school report in terms of, take for example the new school. They are in similar situation that we just opened 3 years ago. I mean, you were going to be surprised about some of the school. So then when you develop a list of the school, I wanted to put it in priority in terms of what, like for example tonight, Commissioner Adams is talking about one of those schools, the STEM school. We do know that the school needs to have 60% graduation rate in order to meet the target and other factors. But we will put down the factor and say, if, for example, if East High School have missed the target by 2%, it would be a different recommendation than, let's say, missing it by 20%. So I think that what Commissioner Cruz is saying, I think it would be excellent to have the discussion, but we have to be also careful that we had that discussion in the context of data understanding so that we don't say, well, we have to have a list because the letter is coming, but because we have to be sensitive also. And I'm telling you, if the East High School had a graduation rate of 58%, although they didn't meet the target, it could be a different response in our part. And I'm not saying that I'm satisfied with 58%, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that it's different missing your target by 2 points versus 20 points. And a certain subgroup, like a special education or English language learner. So we will provide with you with a thorough report. Hopefully by July, we'll be proactive that we're beginning to accumulate that data. And then in each one of those situations saying, here's what we are and here's what is prudent for us to do. Because there will be a lot of question when you see that multiple list, as the commissioner referred to it. And that, unless we have a clear communication plan for each one of the school, we could end up in a situation that it would not be the most desirable, meaning that people would be understandably concerned. They might say, is a letter coming to my school, and what are you doing? That we better have a clear idea of what are the action that we want to follow for each school.
But, I'm sorry, this is the last point I want to make. You know what? I wish each one of our schools realized that there was a letter on their way to get people moving and getting a sense of urgency about what's going on in the schools. Because if you look at the numbers, I don't think there are very many schools in our district right now that can have happy feet at this point. So I think our teachers, our parents, again, our parents and our students need to realize that they're only a little way away from getting a letter. And if they don't understand that, then I think we've got a problem in terms of trying to help to communicate that issue. Because there is a sense of urgency here.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on that, and I think Commissioner.
Section 5.
Well, but wait a second. I realize we can talk about Section 5, we can talk about getting out of here tonight, but let me tell you something. We're going to have a lot longer nights unless we resolve this issue. This is the issue Make no mistake about it. We're talking about schools closing down and how we're going to respond to that. Dr. Vargas is concerned about the response that people might have. Commissioner Cruz responds back, well, wait a second, we got to be honest with people. This is a critical discussion.
But this is budget deliberation.
But I have questions
This is
about
budget
what you're
deliberation.
talking about.
Right,
Same thing, but I didn't get a chance to.
so my point is, I think this is critical conversation, and I know people may disagree. As far as I'm concerned, we could be here all night, because it's that important. It is that important. But we're not going to be. We're not going to be. But.
I just want to ask a question about the same thing that we're talking about.
Okay, all right. So I just want to make this point that Commissioner Cruz has made, and Dr. Vargas, I think you should understand at least my perspective on this. I hear you. You've mentioned in leadership meetings that perhaps this is something we wait till June or July to get the results to see where schools are at. I appreciate that is part of the data. That is important, the data assessment. But at the same point, I think Commissioner Cruz is absolutely correct. And when I talk about a pipeline report, people want to know what's in that pipeline. They want to know if it's 100% crude oil. They want to know if it's watered down, if it's gasoline. They want to know what it is. So I respect, and the New York State Commissioner is already talking about it. So to the extent that there is something in that pipeline, I think we should just be upfront with folks, tell them what it is, and begin to plan accordingly.
I work at your pleasure, so we will give that list by Monday. If you want a list by Monday, we'll give you a list.
Section 5.
I will, if I may, I will say that I'm sensitive student finishing the school year and say I found myself on the list, but I
Stamp it confidential and watermark it. Watermark it.
We will do that. Thank you, President.
Watermark it. Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Commissioner, Commissioner Powell, so I had a comment about the same thing. So my issue isn't about what we're talking about in terms of budget. It's just that I want to make sure everybody has time to talk. I can't remember the last time I even uttered a word in the last hour and a half. I don't think I got a word in edgewise. So that's my point. I want to make sure that people have equal time to talk. And I haven't said anything in the last almost 40 hours. Anyway, school number 58, if I can, and I don't need to answer now, if I can get an email on what's going on around their concerns around professional development. There's a petition going around, and I don't know if you saw the petition, regarding professional development and whether or not we're stripping away the exponential learning elements of that school. That's a concern that they're having. So if we can get some clarification around that, and please don't let it linger, so that we can be able to respond intelligently to their inquiries. The other thing is, being that we're talking about the school profiles and letters and pipeline reports and all those types of things, what we need is a comprehensive plan around every single school. So, I mean, so even if they're not getting a letter, because the scores may not be that well, so maybe 2 years or even 4 years that they're off, what's the plan for every single one of those schools?
But don't we have those comprehensive education plans?
We have those comprehensive education, but I mean immediate plans for all those schools. I'm sure there are, right? I'm sure the principal may have something that they may be saying we're doing X, Y, and Z, but that could be good to see, because I think that can inform us to know what's going on, especially being that it's budget time, because we're expending, for example, at school 15, $2.285 million. What's going to happen at school 15 in terms of making sure that they won't get one of those letters next year, to 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So I think it'd be nice to have plans for every school. So that way it won't make it look like that they're nervous that they're gonna get a letter. But we need to know what they're doing. But if I can get that on 58 schools, that would be extremely helpful.
It just, that brings up a point. Is there some way that we can have in the budget also the status of the comprehensive education plan that is in the budget, that we know? It's for you to think about. But somehow, if we can have, it could be included, because I would imagine that whatever plan that we have for each school, that we need to be following that plan, and that our finances need to be associated with that plan. And so, is it possible to have some kind of a snapshot of the update of the status of the comprehensive plan, education plan, the CEP? Is that possible? And that may not be for this year. Maybe we're talking about for next year. But somehow, I think we need to have in the budget an update, not just a profile of the school, but an update of what's going on in each school.
That's President White, and now you echo that, that's why we asked for to the board that we have the stay out of school in the summer, because you had the fresh data, and we used to do this in January, and that's not the best, more accurate time, so my hope is that beginning this August, that you get that comprehensive started, so each one of the school in a report, that basically we outline what Commissioner Evans and what you are requesting, that here's the plan last year, here's where they finished, here's where they might be going, because I could give you a report today, right, and based on the assessment that took place last week, that report might change, so we need to be, it's not that I don't want to give it to you right now.
No, I'm not asking for it right now, I'm
I,
asking you to
I just explained
consider if it's,
it is an
it may
excellent.
not even be, it may not be an excellent idea, but.
I think it's an excellent idea. That stay at school, we used to do it in January. And I think that part of the reason we move it to August is to give exactly what you are requesting.
But I'm talking about for each school.
Yes.
Okay.
You could have that for each school.
Okay.
GC? Malik, are you?
Yeah.
You're okay. Right. GC?
Just had some clarification around timing on some of the actions. There were a couple questions from round two, and there was a clarification that we're still awaiting responses on. Do you have timing on when those will be provided?
We could release all the answers tomorrow. Ironically, Commissioner Cruz, the two we didn't have the answers on were your Latino questions. And we'll try to work and get those out this week as well.
Okay.
Misplaced priorities, Ron, but that's okay.
Does that include then the actions from round one? There was a list of questions that came out of round one that were follow-ups from the last budget. That's okay, so it's that list, and then there are a couple from round two that'll get the answers, responses. And then the school pages, the additional information that was requested to go into the budget book, I don't know if there was a date that was thrown out for when that would be completed.
We'll certainly have that completed for the proposed budget book. I'll see what we can do about getting copies in your hands prior to that, so you'll have that information.
What's roughly expectation around that?
Could be possibly this week. I just have to check on the status of that because I've been focusing on questions rather than school pages.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Shirley?
We're on section 5?
Whatever question you want to ask.
Yep, thanks. First of all, I'm on section 5, under, program profiles and budgets. What about the African American program? African American, is it studies, or, I didn't see that under programs.
What page is it?
Well, I'm in section 5. Is that considered a program?
It's not considered a program. It's a department. What the intent of the program-based budget pages was to highlight those things that aren't your typical K-12 program, so things we do over and above that. There are many departments, many initiatives we take on that we don't necessarily track and have measures for, and that would be, that would be an example. I don't believe we've ever done a page on the African and African American Studies Department.
Can you tell us what section? Would that be under administration and profiles, or can you point her to a page elsewhere in the budget book she can find that data?
It would be under the
And maybe we haven't gotten to that
Teaching
yet.
and Learning in section 6.
Section 6.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay. So you're willing to trust that you'll find it in section 6 until we get
If
there?
I don't, yeah, I'll ask again.
Okay.
And then the early childhood funding, and then there is universal pre-K. Why isn't all that combined? Can help me to understand early childhood versus universal pre-K. We got proposed 23 million in universal pre-K, if I'm looking at that correctly. And then about 18 million, and I'm referring to section 4, page 176, for early childhood. Help me to understand early childhood education versus universal pre-K. And why aren't those perhaps combined?
They're one and the same, Commissioner. The differentiation.
Oh, is one is under,
Between the two numbers are the benefits.
say that again?
The differentiation between the two reports is the benefit line.
Okay,
In the part of the book, the benefits are shown as its own department, but in the program-based budget templates, we show the benefits to give a full cost of the program. But those two are one and the same.
so the benefits are not under section 4.
Right. Benefits are not in sections 4 or 6.
Okay.
They're in the section 7 with the benefits.
All right, that may need to be clarified, because there are people who are thinking that there's a lot more money for that than it actually is. Someone just mentioned this to me over the weekend, that it's more than, way more than what I had said was, I actually had said 10 million, but that it's, you know, the person said, you know, around 30, 40 million is what he indicated to me. For early childhood and
There are
universal
two
pre-K.
components to that. There's the traditional EPK grant. This is about 10.8 million. The additional funds are the new full-day funding.
Right, okay,
Pre-K, which takes you up to the $23 million level.
okay, all right. But he thought that since it's broken out in early childhood education in section 4, and then we go to section 5, and you've got 23 million, it appears that it is different money. Any way we could clarify that?
Yeah, we've not shown the pre-K in the school section in the past. And we added it this year to show that, you know, because they're not necessarily K-12 students, but they're serving their students. And what we're trying to do is enhance what we show in the school section to show all of those programs. It may be that if we do that, there might be consideration of not showing it in section 5 anymore. Because of the change, this is unique where it's shown in both places.
Okay. Some kind of reference may need to be made, I would think. But,
Well,
thank you.
the problem with all budget books is anybody could look at any part of this budget and expect to see the answer in one section and not think to look in another. There's always another way of categorizing things.
But the average person who's looking at that may not look at it that way.
Even those of us who look at it every year may not be able to find what we're looking for the first try. Commissioner White, do you have any follow-up questions?
Probably.
We're on section 5 now officially, I think.
Yes, probably make a number of people happy. I only have to note that Bill had indicated to me the questions that, or the conversation we had regarding the special committee recommendations. They are working earnestly and spending a lot of time trying to give us the answers to the dialogue that we had. My understanding is those responses, if that's what we'll call them, are going to come in Thursday. Is that right? Thursday evening? Is that right?
Yes, and hopefully before.
Just a little background. What we did is we took all the special committee recommendations, and this was, I really do appreciate Vern and Bill's effort in this regard. And we talked about the different budgetary implications of each special committee recommendation, those that had a price tag on them, those that did not, whether existing efforts existed for those recommendations, and thus making the recommendation moot. So I think that will be very helpful as part of our conversation about those special committee recommendations. So that's it.
You mentioned Thursday. Are you anticipating this being an agenda item on the Finance Committee?
No, well, actually, Bill and I just exchanged this information that we would get it Thursday. I would imagine the board, I would distribute them to the board, or Bill would distribute them to the board, and then there'd be some subsequent conversation, perhaps not Thursday, though.
I understand now.
Thank you.
That's all you have?
Nope, that was it.
Mary?
Okay, on section 5, page 6, this is the athletics one that I know has to be corrected. And my question, 157, it looks like the per pupil cost went from 665 to 1,067, but is that 665 an error because it didn't include all those directors?
That's correct.
Okay, so the per pupil cost should actually be what you put in the answer, which was 1,002.
Right. When part of the learning curve, when we updated this, we failed to update on this one particular one, we failed to update the 13-14 budget. Initially, the directors weren't on there, and they are now in the 13-14 budget in this department. They started out in the schools and then were moved to the department later this year.
So just a quick question, are athletic directors fully devoted to extracurricular sports, or are they also involved in like gym teaching or physical education instruction?
Our ADs are not only responsible for interscholastic sports or intramural programs, they also, one of the reasons why we centralized them is so that they could be targeted to look at and evaluate and supervise our physical education programs, our teachers, and other programs that support our commitment to expand our interscholastic and athletic programs.
Okay, so it's kind of a blending and supports
Right.
the extracurricular.
Our health
Thanks.
classes as well.
Thanks. And then I only have one other thing, and it's just I want to put on the record my opinion about the student and family support centers, that I think that the evidence this year shows that we should restore them rather than continue to cut them. I think it was a mistake to cut them this last year into this year, and my own opinion is that we would do very well to restore them to some targeted schools that are in particular need. And I mean, I would defer to your criteria in terms of where to restore them, but I think they would probably, I think if you use some objective criteria, it would probably match up nicely with what we observe in terms of visiting schools and seeing where extra supports would be helpful.
That's everything? Okay. Jose? Questions? Section 5? None? GC? Section 5? Commissioner Elliott? No question. My only comment on Section 5 is there's significantly fewer programs, and the programs that are left are only very large programs. It seems to me that whether it's simply a function of small programs without grant funding can't survive, or whether it's a function of evaluating those programs right out of existence because they weren't producing. Could you just sort of give us a narrative on that, and maybe even at some stage compile a list of programs that we used to track that aren't here anymore and why they're not?
We can certainly do that, Commissioner, but this goes back to the superintendent's point about being able to sustain programs. I would say almost all the programs that are no longer here were funded by the Contract for Excellence. And as that money dried up, those
Don't get me started.
I'm sorry, but that's,
that's the truth.
That's
It's
essentially, but we can provide you with the list.
Okay. So it's, quite frankly, they were optional programs that couldn't be sustained without their own source of funding because most of our money is essentially devoted to mandated programs.
Well, I'd like to get a little further than that. I think they were initiated with a lot of intent. They may not have always been measured well to some of the issues brought up earlier. But when the foundation aid money did not increase on schedule, and it actually froze and was reduced. Decisions had to be made between continuing these programs or cutting into schools, cutting into core programs. And I don't know that they were necessarily abandoned because people thought it was a good idea to abandon them. It was more a case of we had to make choices based on the funding available. And so because these were, I don't want to use the word optional, but these were extra programs, we chose to retain the core in the schools, and these programs unfortunately met budget cuts.
And the problem with that, not to get into a dialogue, the problem with that is it'd be helpful if programs were dropped because they weren't carrying their weight. But if a program was actually delivering results and was stopped simply because the money wasn't there, and that money is being preserved for perhaps not necessarily mandated programs in a school that didn't happen to have a name and didn't happen to be tracked as a separate program, we haven't really accomplished our objective, which is to be a data-driven organization. All we've really done is succumb to the pressures of the finances. And that brings, of course, to everybody knows my favorite topic, which is our role as agents of the state in this instance is to push back against the state when it fails to meet its constitutional obligations. And I know there are people here that say, we've got enough money to do our job. I understand that. So let's just assume I'm talking to everybody else. Okay?
That's fine.
And say, we have to step up to the plate because it's our children who are suffering. It's our children whose programs, whether they're mandated or not, are being dropped, whether they're successful or not, whether they're making the difference. It's part of the conversation about the school support services offices. Nothing in the state says we have to have those. But all of our intuition tells us that makes a difference in our kids. Nothing in the state mandate says that we need social workers in every school. But our collective intuition tells us that makes all of the difference in the world. So, unfortunately, circumstances really beyond our control have caused this whole program-based budgeting initiative to shrink down to a small handful of pages. That's not necessarily a good thing because it essentially drives the data-driven aspects of our institution underground and buries it all into the mandated programs. And, you know, we aren't even sure how much money in the mandated portion of our budget. The operational portion of our budget is actually optional because the institution is every individual school is protecting itself by calling everything mandatory, right? Well, that way I don't have to divulge or I don't even have to look at whether it's successful or not. It's kind of the ass's end of what you were describing, Commissioner White, about the need for data to drive things. There's another force at work here driving that information underground out of self-preservation, and it's ugly, and it makes our job harder. But it's every bit as real as asking for data and not having it delivered or not having it delivered on a timely basis. So, thank you, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, for your time. Our audience has dwindled. If there are no further questions, I will close this meeting by reminding everyone that April 22nd is our next public hearing. May 1st is our next deliberation session. Vern, can you remind us when questions are due for the third deliberation session? And can you also tell us when we're going to get the CIP? Because that's going to have to be on the discussion for our third deliberation session.
Okay, the answer to your first question is that the round 3 questions are due by to Deborah by the end of the day on the 21st. That's this Monday. In terms of the CIP, we want to provide that to you in 2 parts. We want to provide a summary document to you this week so that you can have that to be able to provide questions for the third round. The full documents we're still working on. We expect to complete that probably by the end of the month. So we'll be able to get that to you probably a week or so before the budget vote.
And the summary document will have all the details for 14-15, so you'll have all the facts in front of you for 14-15. It's the out years that the CIP will have.
Okay, thank you for all of your time and attention, audience as well as participants.
Yeah, I know.
It's somebody's attention.